The last time I saw my daughter truly happy, she was marrying a man whose true face I wouldn't recognize until it was almost too late. The warning didn't come from my 30 years as a forensic psychologist, but from the terrified whisper of my 6-year-old grandson. I've always held that children perceive a truth adults have learned to ignore. They haven't been conditioned to dismiss the gut feelings that crawl up their spine, to rationalize the subtle inconsistencies that scream wrong. My grandson, Jaime, became the living proof of that theory on the sun-drenched May afternoon of his mother's second wedding, and in doing so, he almost certainly saved her life. The day had been flawless, a storybook setting for Kathleen's outdoor ceremony at the opulent Grand Arcadia Hotel. 3 years had passed since her first husband, Richard, was stolen by a sudden heart attack, and my daughter deserved this second chance at happiness. Her new husband, Andrew Parker, seemed to have stepped directly from the pages of a romance novel, impossibly handsome, successful, and utterly devoted to both Kathleen and Jamie. Of course, I had my reservations. Their romance had been a whirlwind, and I'd occasionally seen a look in Andrew's eyes when he watched Kathleen, not love, but something colder, more like assessment. He was conveniently vague about his life before he'd moved to our city 5 years ago. But I held my tongue. At 65, I knew that unsolicited advice, especially from a mother to her daughter about a new love, was a fool's errand. The reception was in full swing inside the crystal ballroom when the illusion shattered. Jaime, who had been quietly drawing at the children's table, suddenly appeared at my side. His face was ashen, his small hand gripping mine with an icy urgency. "Grandma Lucy," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I want to go home, right now." I immediately set down my champagne, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Jamie was a placid child, never one for drama or demands. "What is it, sweetheart?" His gaze darted nervously toward the head table where Kathleen and Andrew were laughing with their wedding party. "You didn't see what's under the table?" he asked. I followed his eyes. The table was draped in floor-length ivory linen, a picture of floral arrangements and glittering crystal. Nothing seemed amiss. "Under the table?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle despite his fear. He nodded frantically, his whisper dropping lower. "There's a wallet. It fell out, but it's not Andrew's. The picture is him, but the name is different, and there's a scorecard." A chill snaked through the warm ballroom. "A scorecard. It has names," he explained, his voice cracking. "Ladies' names, with big numbers next to them." My professional instincts, dormant since retirement, roared to life. Children Jamie's age don't invent such specific structured details. They might imagine boogeymen, but not financial ledgers of potential victims. I stood my movements discreet. "Show me Jamie. Pretend you're tying my shoe." He led me toward the head table where Andrew was deep in conversation with his best man, a slick individual named Marcus. Kathleen was thankfully absent, mingling with guests. I knelt, feigning an issue with my heel, and peered under the tablecloth. There it was, half hidden by a table leg near Andrew's chair, a dark leather wallet flipped open. I could clearly see the photo ID. The face was Andrew's, but the name on the license read Stephen Croft. Next to it, peeking out, was a folded piece of paper. Even from a distance, I could make out columns of names and numbers written in neat, precise script. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was the architecture of a long con. The possibility that my daughter had just married a predator sent a surge of adrenaline through me. "Grandma, what do we do?" Jamie whispered, his small face a mask of adult gravity. The question was a landmine. A direct confrontation would only give this man, Andrew or Stephen, or whoever he was, time to destroy evidence and spin a web of lies. Kathleen, blinded by love, would never believe it without undeniable proof. "We are going to be very, very clever," I told Jamie, rising and smoothing my dress. "And this is our secret. You cannot tell anyone, not even your mom, not yet." "Is Mom in danger?" he asked, his lower lip trembling. I chose my words with surgical precision, knowing a child's perception of fear is a fragile thing. "I don't think so, But we need to find out more about Andrew. You did the perfect thing by telling me. As if on cue, Andrew himself approached his $1 million smile firmly in place. There's my best guy, he boomed, ruffling Jamie's hair. Having fun, buddy. I watched my grandson force a smile, a 6-year-old already learning the grim adult art of social camouflage. Yes, Jamie said, his voice a thin thread. Grandma Lucy was just fixing my shoe. Andrew's charismatic gaze turned to me. Lucy, you look stunning. I was just telling Marcus how lucky I am to be joining such a wonderful family. I mirrored his smile, decades of professional practice allowing me to mask the storm of suspicion inside. The ceremony was beautiful, Andrew. You and Kathleen are a perfect match. He wrapped a proprietary arm around Jamie's shoulders. I'm the lucky one. A beautiful wife, and this great little man as a bonus. The way his hand gripped Jamie's shoulder sent another jolt of alarm through me. If my hunch was right, his interest in my grandson had nothing to do with fatherly affection and everything to do with the sizable trust fund Richard had left for his son. A fund to which Kathleen, now remarried, was the sole trustee. First dance is coming up, Andrew said. I should find my bride. As he walked away, Jamie pressed against me. I don't want to stay here, Grandma. I made a split-second decision. Go to your mom, tell her you have a headache and feel sick. Ask if you can come home with me. He nodded, his small face set with purpose. As he scurried off, I glanced around. Seeing no one watching, I knelt by the head table again. The wallet was gone. My heart sank, but as I stood, my eyes met Marcus's from across the room. He raised his champagne flute in a slow, deliberate toast, his eyes cold and unblinking. It wasn't a gesture of celebration, it was an acknowledgement. He had seen me, he knew. The drive to my home was a tense silence, Jamie dozing in the back while my mind raced. The predator had a partner. By the time Kathleen called just after midnight, I knew what was coming. Mom, is Chimey okay? Her voice was tight, with a carefully manufactured concern that wasn't her own. He's fast asleep. Is everything all right, honey? It's just, Andrew was worried. He said you seemed upset when you left. The hair on my arms stood on end. He was already working to discredit me, a classic isolation tactic I'd seen in dozens of cases. Not at all, I replied smoothly. Just a tired little boy. A pause. Did he say anything about Andrew? Nothing specific. Why? Andrew thinks Chimey might be struggling with the idea of a stepfather, she said, reciting a script. He suggested we find a specialist for him to talk to, maybe even a therapeutic boarding school he knows of. He said it's for exceptional children. The tactic was so familiar, it was chilling. It reminded me of the Charmer case from a decade ago, a con artist who convinced families their children had fabricated mental illnesses to access their education trusts. He was moving to neutralize the witness by painting him as psychologically unreliable. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 9. It wasn't Kathleen. It was Andrew, alone, dressed in casual designer clothes, the picture of the concerned stepfather. Lucy? He said, his smile as bright and empty as a stage light. Thought I'd pick up Jamie myself, give us a little bonding time before we head off. Behind me, I heard a small gasp as Jamie, who had been coming down the hall, saw him and immediately ducked behind a large armchair. Andrew's smile didn't waver, but his eyes tracked the movement with a flicker of cold analysis before returning to mine. May I come in? He didn't wait for an answer, stepping over the threshold with an air of absolute ownership. In my living room, he got straight to the point. As Jamie's new stepfather, he began, his tone oozing reasonableness. I want to be sure we're all on the same page. Children can have vivid imaginations. Indulging their fantasies can be detrimental. I met his gaze, my professional calm a shield. In my experience, I said, deliberately letting the words hang in the air, children are remarkably perceptive. They see the cracks in a story that adults have trained themselves to ignore. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed his face. Yes, Kathleen mentioned your background. Forensic psychology, wasn't it? Specializing in fraud and confidence schemes, I clarified. The patterns of deception are quite distinct once you know what to look for. We were no longer talking about Jamie. His mask of charm tightened. It must be a burden to see monsters in every shadow, Lucy, he said, his voice soft but laced with steel. Sometimes the shadows are just shadows, and sometimes people who stare into them for too long get lost. It was a direct threat. Just then, he feigned a sudden thought. Oh, that reminds me. My colleague Marcus thinks he may have lost his wallet here last night. Dark leather. Did Jamie happen to find anything? He was probing, checking if the evidence had made it to me. Not that he mentioned. I lied coolly. But I'll keep an eye out. He smiled, satisfied for the moment. Don't trouble yourself. I'm sure it will turn up. I watched from the window as he led a visibly reluctant Jamie to his sleek black sedan. I had just let my grandson get into a car with a predator, and I had no proof that would hold up in any court. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, rising fury. He had come to my home to evaluate me, to threaten me. And he had underestimated me. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Martin Prescott, the best private investigator I knew. Martin, I said, my voice tight, cancel your appointments. Our timeline just got moved up. Martin worked with terrifying speed. By the time I had settled Jamie with a movie and a plate of his favorite cookies, the first email arrived. The subject line was a single grim word pattern. Andrew Parker was a ghost. But my grandson's clue, Stephen Croft, had been the key. That name was linked to a 58-year-old divorcee in San Diego who had died in a boating accident 2 years prior. Just weeks before her death, she had signed a revised will, leaving her entire multi-million-dollar estate to her beloved husband of 6 months, Stephen. From there, the dominoes fell. Martin, using proprietary databases that scraped public records and social media, unearthed 2 more identities. There was Mark Peterson, the grieving widower of a 64-year-old Boston heiress who had suffered a sudden fatal allergic reaction despite having no known allergies. And there was Robert Sterling, the husband of a 72-year-old widow in Palm Beach who had died after a brief illness. Each case was a chilling echo, a whirlwind romance, a quick marriage to a wealthy, vulnerable woman, a sudden revision of legal documents, and a convenient, tragic death that left him in sole possession of a fortune. Then he would vanish only to reemerge in a new city with a new name. The pattern was sickeningly clear, but it was a tapestry woven from circumstance and suspicion. I needed to protect Jamie's trust fund. My second call was to Sandra Wilson, a formidable judge and an old friend. Sandy, I'm in a terrible situation, and I need off-the-record advice. I began quickly laying out the skeletal facts I had. Lucy, this is a lot, she said, her judicial caution evident in her tone. A child's story about a wallet, a few obituaries. It's not enough to legally freeze a person's assets without their knowledge, especially not your daughter's, the legal trustee. You could face serious repercussions. Her skepticism was a wall of ice, but I pushed back, my voice raw with urgency. This isn't just a hunch, Sandy. This is a pattern. I've built my career on recognizing these signatures. He's already suggested putting Jamie in a therapeutic school. He's laying the groundwork to drain the trust, and I'm terrified of what he'll do to Kathleen once he has it. I could hear her sigh, the sound of friendship warring with professional obligation. Okay, Lucy. A formal freeze is out of the question without more concrete proof. But there might be another way. I can place a temporary monitoring hold on the trust account. It wouldn't block a withdrawal, Sandy explained, but it would flag any significant activity and require a secondary verification call directly to my chambers. It's the most I can do under the circumstances. It was a small shield, not a sword, but it was something. A tripwire. But it wouldn't save Kathleen from the man she was about to be isolated with for 2 weeks at sea. Kathleen and Andrew were scheduled to leave for their Caribbean cruise at 3 o'clock that afternoon. It was already 11. Armed with a chilling pattern but no single piece of smoking gun evidence, I knew I had only one chance left: a direct, desperate appeal to my daughter before she boarded that ship. I found Kathleen in her bedroom, a sea of bright summer clothes and new luggage surrounding her. She looked up, her smile faltering at the grim set of my jaw. "Mom, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. "About Andrew." Her face hardened instantly. "Oh, please don't. Not today. It's my honeymoon." "I wouldn't be here if this wasn't a matter of life and death," I said, my voice low and urgent. I sat on the edge of her bed, the expensive new suitcase a garish symbol of her impending danger. "Andrew Parker isn't who he says he is." I laid it all out: the wallet, the alias Stephen Croft, the scorecard of names, the string of dead wives. I showed her the obituaries on my phone, the smiling photos of the man she'd just married standing next to women who were now in their graves. Her reaction was not fear, but a hot, defensive anger. "What have you been doing investigating my husband?" she demanded, her face flushing. "Jamie has a wild imagination and you're feeding into it. This is insane. This is a pattern, Kathleen, a lethal predatory pattern. Andrew warned me you'd do this," she shot back, and my blood ran cold. Of course he had. He had preemptively poisoned the well. "He warned you, honey. Think, why would an innocent man need to warn you against your own mother unless he was hiding something?" "Because he knows how you are," she retorted, her voice rising. "You're overprotective. You never thought anyone was good enough for me. You did the same thing with Richard, at first questioning his motives, convinced he was using me." The accusation was a sharp, painful jab because it held a sliver of truth. I had been cautious with Richard, a normal maternal fear that had quickly proven baseless. But this was different. This was a monster wearing a mask. "This is not the same," I insisted, my voice pleading. "This is evidence." "You know what?" she said, grabbing her phone with furious energy. "Let's just clear this up right now." Before I could stop her, she had dialed Andrew and put him on speaker. "Honey," Andrew's voice, rich and warm, filled the room. "Is everything okay?" "My mother is here," Kathleen said, her voice dripping with accusation. "She has some insane theory that you're a con man named Stephen Croft who murders wealthy widows." There was a perfectly timed pause, followed by a deep, wounded sigh. He said, his voice a masterpiece of sorrowful resignation. "I was afraid of this. Kathleen, darling, your mother is right about one thing. I did use that name once years ago. It was for a private business matter to protect myself from a vindictive ex-partner. It was a mistake and I'm not proud of it. But to twist that into this Lucy," he said, his tone shifting to one of pained sincerity. "I can't imagine the paranoia you must live with. I am so sorry that my past has caused you this distress, but I love your daughter more than anything." He had an answer for everything. Smooth, plausible, and perfectly designed to paint me as the villain. Kathleen looked at me, her eyes flashing with a mixture of vindication and fury. "Do you see?" she whispered. "Do you see how crazy you sound?" The argument was over. I had lost. He had outmaneuvered me completely. I stood up, defeated. As I walked to the door, a primal desperation seized me. I grabbed her arm, my grip harder than I intended. She flinched. I leaned in close, my voice a raw, urgent whisper that came from the deepest part of my soul. "Listen to me. Forget everything else. Just promise me this. Don't sign anything, and don't let him get you on the open water." She pulled her arm away, her expression a wall of stone. "Goodbye, Mom," she said, her voice flat and cold. As I walked out of her house, the weight of my failure was a physical thing, a suffocating cloak of dread. I hadn't saved my daughter. I had just pushed her further into the arms of her killer. My car felt like a tomb as I drove aimlessly, navigating the suburban streets. I had failed. The image of Kathleen's cold, angry face was seared into my mind. I had played my hand and lost, and now the predator was taking his prize out to sea, to a place of perfect isolation where anything could happen. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and I ignored it, assuming it was a well-meaning friend calling about the wedding. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, I glanced at the screen. It was Martin. I answered my voice, flat and dead. It's over, Martin. She didn't believe me. It's not over, he said, his voice crackling with an electric energy that cut through my despair. Listen to me, Lucy. I've got it. The smoking gun. The irrefutable link. I pulled the car over my hands, suddenly slick on the steering wheel. What are you talking about? The Boston case, he said, speaking in rapid-fire bursts. The heiress Janet Sterling, who died from the allergic reaction. 2 days before her death, she authorized a wire transfer of $2 million to a shell corporation called M Corp Holdings. I've been digging at it all morning. It was supposedly for a private art acquisition. It looked like a dead end until I cross-referenced the corporate registration. The sole director of M Corp, Alex Mercer. That's Marcus's real name. He funneled the money, Lucy. It's the hard proof of conspiracy, financial records, a direct link from a dead victim to Andrew's accomplice. This isn't a theory anymore. It's a federal crime. The world snapped back into sharp focus. A direct wire transfer. A money trail. The kind of concrete, logical evidence no one, not even a daughter blinded by love, could deny. I looked at the dashboard clock, 1:47 p.m. The ship sailed at 3. Where are they boarding? I demanded. Port Authority Terminal B, he replied instantly. I'm sending the file to your phone now. It's everything. The wire transfer confirmation, Mercer's corporate filings, his criminal record for securities fraud. Go, Lucy. You can still catch them. I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the car into gear, tires squealing as I made a U-turn and sped toward the downtown port, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The port was a chaotic whirlwind of activity, a city of vacationers bustling toward the towering white cruise ship. I abandoned my car in a short-term lot and ran, pushing through crowds of laughing families, my phone clutched in my hand. I had 20 minutes. At the security checkpoint, a uniformed agent held up a hand, his expression bored and impassible. Boarding pass, ma'am. I don't have one. I panted, breathless. It's an emergency. I have to get to my daughter. I'm sorry, only ticketed passengers beyond this point. Desperation sparked a drastic idea. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent tone. My daughter, I said, inventing on the fly, has paroxysmal sympathetic hyperactivity. It's a rare neurological disorder. She's prone to severe hypertensive panic attacks. She accidentally packed her emergency beta blockers in her checked luggage, and she thinks I have her backup injector. If I don't get this to her, I said, holding up a small bottle of hand sanitizer from my purse, she could have a stroke before the ship even leaves the dock. The agent's bored expression flickered with alarm. The specificity of the lie, the sheer panic in my eyes was enough. He spoke briefly into his radio, and after a tense moment, a supervisor appeared and waved me through with a temporary visitor's pass. 15 minutes, he warned sternly. Then you're off this ship one way or another. I ran up the gangway, my feet pounding against the metal, the salty air thick with the smell of imminent departure, and my last desperate chance. The ship was a floating palace of chaos. A calypso band was playing on the Lido deck, a counterpoint to the frantic symphony in my head. I scanned the throng of passengers clutching tropical drinks, their faces alight with vacation joy. Then I saw them tucked away at a corner table overlooking the water. Andrew was leaning in close to Kathleen, his hand covering hers. To anyone else, it was a picture of romantic intimacy. But I could see the tension in his posture, the persuasive intensity in his eyes. On the table between them lay a thick sheaf of legal documents. I approached from behind, catching the tail end of his sentence. And with me as co-trustee, we can authorize the investment while we're at sea. The opportunity disappears the second we get back. It's a guaranteed return, honey, for Jamie's future. I don't know, Andrew, Kathleen said, her voice laced with uncertainty. Richard always said to have a lawyer look at everything. Do you trust me? He asked, his voice a soft, manipulative caress. As your husband? She hesitated, and in that fragile half-second pause, I stepped into the light. Kathleen. They both jumped, Andrew's face morphed from irritation to feigned, loving surprise in a blink. Lucy, what on earth are you doing here? Is Jamie okay? Jamie is fine, I said, my eyes locked on my daughter's pale, shocked face. But you are not. Do not sign that paper. Andrew stood, placing himself subtly between us, a human shield of charm. Lucy, you're making a scene. The ship is about to leave. It can't wait, I said, holding up my phone, the screen glowing with Martin's email. Especially since that document is your first step in stealing your new stepson's inheritance. It's a classic move in your playbook, isn't it, Daniel? The name hit him like a physical blow. A flicker of pure, unadulterated fury crossed his face before he masked it. My name is Andrew, he said through a tight smile. His real name is Daniel Colby. I said directly to Kathleen, turning the phone so she could see the wire transfer confirmation. And this is proof that his best man, Alex Mercer, received $2 million from his last wife just before she died. Her name was Janet Sterling. She's one of at least 3 women who married him and ended up dead within 18 months. Kathleen stared at the screen, her hand flying to her mouth. The legal jargon, the familiar name of a shell corporation, it was concrete, undeniable. Andrew, what is this? Your mother is having a psychotic break. He hissed, his charm dissolving into raw venom. She's obsessed, He lunged, not for me, but for the phone, intending to snatch it and hurl it into the ocean. But Kathleen moved faster. In a swift, instinctive motion, she grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Her face was a mask of dawning horror and betrayal. The man she had married yesterday was a stranger, a monster, and he was trying to destroy the truth in front of her very eyes. Her action was the only confirmation I needed. The ship's horn blasted, a deafening signal of final departure. Andrew saw it too, his eyes darting toward the exits. He wrenched his arm from Kathleen's grasp. "This isn't over," he snarled at me. Then, with calculated chaos, he shoved the entire table, sending champagne flutes, documents, and plates crashing onto the deck and into the laps of the startled passengers next to us. In the ensuing pandemonium of shrieks and shattering glass, he melted into the panicked crowd and was gone. I rushed to Kathleen's side as security officers alerted by Martin began to converge on our location. She stood frozen, clutching the document that would have signed away her son's future, tears streaming down her face as she stared into the chaos where her husband had just been. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What have I done?" "You stopped him," I said, pulling her into my arms. "Now let's get you off this ship." The next few hours were a surreal blur of sterile police interrogation rooms and the bitter taste of stale coffee. At the Miami-Dade Police Department, Kathleen sat wrapped in a coarse police blanket, staring at the growing evidence board. Photos of Daniel with his previous wives' timelines, corporate flowcharts. It was the anatomy of a monster. Detective Carlos Ramirez Martin's contact spoke with a gentle, weary authority. "These predators," he explained to a hollow-eyed Kathleen, "they are masters of empathy. They don't feel it, but they mirror it perfectly. They study their targets, find the empty spaces left by grief or loneliness, and become the exact shape needed to fill them." "But I'm not wealthy like they were," Kathleen whispered, a desperate attempt to find a flaw in the horrifying logic. "His primary target was Jamie's trust fund." I explained softly, the words feeling like poison on my tongue. Her face crumpled as the pieces clicked into place. "The special school, the psychologist." Martin arrived later, his expression grim. They had apprehended Alex Mercer Marcus at the airport, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. He had started talking immediately, trading his secrets for a lighter sentence. "It's worse than we imagined, Lucy," Martin told me in the hallway out of Kathleen's earshot. "This wasn't just about money. Daniel's specialty, according to Mercer, was what he called psychological erasure. He would systematically isolate his victims from their families, manipulate them into questioning their own memories and sanity, making their eventual accidents or suicides seem like the tragic, inevitable conclusion. A cold dread deeper than anything I'd felt before settled in my bones. Mercer also confirmed Daniel keeps a central repository of all his operations, Martin continued. A detailed cache of evidence, wills, fake IDs, financial trails, even journals he stole from his victims to study them. It's his trophy room, and he says it's somewhere in Chicago. He paused, his eyes holding mine. He also said something else, that Daniel wasn't the top of the food chain. The real architect of this whole scheme is someone else. A pillar of the community, he called them, someone with impeccable credentials who identifies the targets and handles the complex legal framework. That night, in the sterile safety of a police-guarded hotel room, I watched Kathleen scroll obsessively through her phone. She was examining every photo, every email, every text message from the past year, her face a mask of anguish. She was searching for the exact moment the lie began, trying to pinpoint the hairline fracture where the monster had first slipped through. He quoted a poem Richard used to read to me, she said quietly, not looking up from her screen. I thought it was a beautiful coincidence, a sign. The methodical, predatory nature of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just seduced her, he had studied her, memorized her history, and worn the ghost of her dead husband like a costume to win her trust. The danger was no longer on a ship in the middle of the ocean. It was waiting for us at home. The conspiracy had a head, and it was hidden somewhere in the familiar streets of Chicago. We flew back to a gray, steel-colored Chicago sky. A plainclothes detective, Sarah Walsh, met us at the gate. "We have units at your home, Dr. Miller," she said, her voice crisp and professional as she escorted us through the terminal. "And surveillance on your daughter's residence. So far, no sign of Colby." At my quiet suburban home, which now felt like a fortress, we reunited with Jamie. He launched himself into Kathleen's arms, a moment of pure, untainted joy in a world that had turned dark. But the relative safety was a thin veneer over a gaping wound. Kathleen was a ghost in my house, moving through the rooms with a haunted, hollowed-out look. She needed to go back to her own home just once to gather clothes, Jamie's favorite toys, a semblance of a life that had been a lie. Detective Walsh arranged for a 2-car escort. "We've swept the house twice since you left for Miami. It's clean," she assured us. But as we pulled onto Kathleen Street, my own internal alarm, the one honed by decades of studying predators, began to scream. "Something's wrong," I murmured. The house looked perfect, its modernist lines pristine against the afternoon light. But as we walked up the path, I saw it. The welcome mat, a gift from me, was slightly askew. A small, insignificant detail that was profoundly wrong. Kathleen always kept it perfectly straight. Inside, the police did another sweep. "All clear?" one of them announced. But my unease was a physical presence, a cold weight in my chest. In the living room, a book of poetry on the coffee table was open to a specific page, the very poem Kathleen had told me Daniel had quoted to her. He was leaving breadcrumbs. He was toying with us. "I'll just be a minute," Kathleen said, her voice brittle as she headed upstairs. Detective Parker, one of our escorts, stayed with me in the kitchen. The other officer was outside circling the perimeter. Seconds stretched into a minute. Then came a soft, muffled thump from above. "Kathleen?" I called out, my voice sharp. Silence. Detective Parker's hand went to his hip. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called, his tone shifting from casual to tactical. Then her voice came tight and unnaturally high. "I'm fine, just talking to Andrew." Andrew, not Daniel. It was a code, a desperate, terrified signal we had established years ago. After a minor home invasion, a word to be used if she were ever under duress. Parker drew his weapon, his eyes locking with mine. "Stay here," he ordered in a low voice. I had no intention of staying anywhere. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a solid marble rolling pin from a counter canister, and followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs. He moved up the stairs with silent, practiced efficiency, me a few steps behind. At the threshold of the master bedroom he paused, then entered in a fluid, tactical motion. "Chicago police hands where I can see them." Then the voice that would haunt my nightmares stripped of all its silken charm, cold and flat. "That's not going to happen, detective." I risked a look. Daniel was behind Kathleen, one arm locked around her throat, the other holding a syringe with a glittering needle pressed against her neck. "Ah, Lucy," he said, his dead eyes finding me in the doorway. "The meddling mother-in-law. You're the one who forced this. I had such a clean, simple plan." My mind raced. Distraction. Ego. "They have your trophy room, Daniel," I bluffed, stepping into the room. "They found the storage unit. They have it all." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. His narcissistic pride, his need to be seen as a genius, was his only vulnerability. "They don't have everything," he snarled. "They'll never understand the artistry." For a split second, his focus shifted to me, his ego pricked. It was the opening Kathleen had been waiting for. With a guttural cry, she stomped her heel down, grinding it into the arch of his foot, and simultaneously threw her head back, smashing the crown of her skull into his nose. There was a sickening crunch. His grip loosened for a microsecond. It was enough. As he roared in pain, I lunged forward, swinging the heavy marble rolling pin in a two-handed arc connecting with a sickening crack against his wrist. The syringe flew through the air, skittering across the hardwood floor. In the same instant, Detective Parker surged forward, tackling Daniel to the ground. Within seconds, it was over. Daniel was pinned, handcuffed, his face a mask of blood and impotent rage. Kathleen collapsed into my arms, shaking uncontrollably. As other officers flooded the room, I looked at the chaos, at the subdued monster on the floor, and a chilling thought solidified in my mind. The police had cleared the house twice. He hadn't broken in. He had been here the whole time, hiding in the walls in the attic, waiting for her. Waiting for us. 3 months later, the world was still tilted on its axis, but we were learning to walk on the slanted ground. Daniel Colby was in a federal detention center, a caged monster whose vast multi-state conspiracy was being painstakingly unraveled by a task force. Kathleen and Jamie were living with me, her beautiful modernist house, now a crime scene, tainted by a violence that had shattered its glass walls and its perfect facade. One crisp autumn morning, Detective Walsh came to my door, not with an update, but with a cardboard box. "We've finished processing the personal effects from Kathleen's house," she said, setting the box on my kitchen table. "Most of it is still evidence, but these were cleared." It was a strange collection of ghosts, photo albums, wedding gifts, Jamie's kindergarten drawings, and tucked at the bottom was Richard's old leather-bound journal. I hadn't even known it was missing. "We found this in a false bottom in Colby's closet organizer." Walsh explained, her eyes on the journal. "Forensics confirmed his prints are all over it. He studied it, Lucy, extensively." A profound sickness washed over me as I opened it. Richard's neat architectural handwriting filled the pages. He had documented everything: business deals, family vacations, private jokes, his hopes for Jamie's future. And I saw with dawning horror comprehensive notes on their finances, including the exact structure and provisions of Jamie's trust fund. "He used this," I whispered, my voice thick. "He used Richard's own words, his own memories, to become the perfect man for Kathleen." Walsh nodded grimly. "It's a level of methodical preparation we've rarely seen. He left nothing to chance." I turned the pages, my hands trembling, until I reached the last entries dated the month before Richard's heart attack. He wrote of a routine checkup, elevated blood pressure, a new medication. The last entry mentioned a follow-up stress test he had scheduled for the following week, an appointment he never kept. "Detective," I asked, my throat tight, "did you find anything in Daniel's records about Richard's death?" Her expression was all the answer I needed. "We've officially reopened the investigation," she said quietly. "The ME is reviewing preserved tissue samples. Preliminary findings suggest the presence of a potassium chloride derivative that can induce cardiac arrest, virtually undetectable after a few hours. He had murdered Richard. He had created the vacancy he intended to fill." The doorbell rang, startling us both. "I'm expecting Kathleen's attorney," I said, my mind reeling. "Charles Whitman. He's helping with the annulment. As Walsh left, Charles arrived the picture of distinguished compassion he had been for 20 years. A family friend, Richard's longtime lawyer, the man who had helped me pick up the pieces after Richard's death. "Lucy," he greeted me warmly. "I have the final papers for Kathleen to sign." "She's on her way back from Jamie's school," I said, leading him into the living room. "Coffee." While I prepared it in the kitchen, my thoughts were a chaotic storm. Richard murdered, a conspiracy deeper than we knew. When I returned, Charles was standing by the table, Richard's journal open in his hands. "Ah, Richard's journal," he commented with a soft, nostalgic smile. "I always wondered where this went. So many useful details in here." He looked up, catching my expression, and his smile faltered. He saw that I understood. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flat reptilian coldness I had seen only once before in the eyes of Daniel Colby. That last entry about his heart palpitations was particularly helpful. He said, his voice a quiet conversational horror. It gave us the perfect narrative. The coffee tray slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the floor. "It was you," I whispered, the final monstrous piece of the puzzle sliding into place. "You were his partner. You fed him the information. You pointed him at my family." Charles sighed, a sound of mild disappointment, as if a complex but enjoyable game had ended prematurely. "Daniel was the talent, I was the strategist," he said, setting the journal down with reverent care. "I identify the target's clients' professional acquaintances, people with assets and exploitable vulnerabilities. Daniel handles the acquisition. It was a perfect partnership. But he got sloppy with Kathleen. I told him a grieving daughter with a young son was an unnecessary complication." A wave of nausea hit me as I remembered his compassionate advice after Richard's death. Every word a carefully placed stepping stone, leading my grieving daughter directly into a predator's path. He had been grooming us for the slaughter all along. My hand went to my pocket, my fingers closing around the cool metal of my phone, a subconscious anchor in a world that was dissolving into a nightmare. I'd been dictating case notes into a voice memo app earlier and had never turned it off. "How many?" I asked, my voice a stranger's, my only goal to keep him talking, to keep the recording going. "Besides Daniel's wives." He considered it with the detached air of an accountant reviewing a ledger. 14 successful operations over the years. Daniel was a gifted artist, but I provided the canvas. His gaze sharpened. "Speaking of loose ends, where is Kathleen?" "Traffic," I lied, taking a half step sideways toward the hallway, toward the console table, where my purse and the small handgun I'd started carrying was sitting. "Why tell me this, Charles? You know I'll go straight to the police." A thin, bloodless smile touched his lips. "And say what?" "That the man who managed your family's affairs for 2 decades confessed to being part of a murder-for-profit syndicate. Without proof, Lucy, you'll just sound like the grieving, paranoid woman Daniel tried to paint you as. This conversation, unfortunately, is purely academic. I can't leave you as a variable." He reached into his leather portfolio and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't papers he withdrew, but another syringe identical to the one Daniel had held to my daughter's throat. "Succinylcholine," he said, confirming the nightmare. "So efficient. A tragic cardiac event brought on by the immense stress you've been under. Everyone will understand." He took a step toward me. In that instant, the front door opened. "Mom," Kathleen's voice called out. "There's a police car still parked at the curb. Did Detective Walsh come back?" Charles froze, his body coiled like a snake. The distraction was my only chance. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the hallway, shouting, "Siri, call 911!" as my hand closed around the grip of my gun. "Stay back, Kathleen!" I screamed, turning and leveling the weapon at Charles. "He's with Daniel. He's the one who planned it all." I heard a gasp, the scuffling of feet, as Kathleen pulled Jamie back onto the porch. Charles and I were locked in a terrifying tableau, the genteel lawyer replaced by a cornered predator. "You won't shoot me, Lucy," he hissed, taking a step forward. "Not in your own home." "I lost a son-in-law because of you," I said, my hands rock steady, the sights centered on his chest. "I won't lose anything else." The first wail of an approaching siren cut through the silence. Detective Walsh hadn't left. She had been waiting. Charles heard it too. Panic flickered in his cold eyes. He lunged not at me, but toward the back of the house toward escape. I fired once. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. He spun a look of pure shock on his face and crumpled to the floor, clutching a blossoming red stain on his shoulder. "You shot me," he gasped, as if the concept were an impossible theory. "You actually shot me." "I told you I would," I replied, the gun still trained on him, as uniformed officers burst through the front door. A year later, we stood in the garden of Kathleen's new house. A simple stone for Richard rested under a cherry tree, a final quiet truth. "He used our trust against us," Kathleen said, watching Jamie place a painted rock at the base of the memorial. "That's what they do," I replied. "They find the places where love lives, and they plant their poison there." Jamie looked up, his young face serious. "Is it okay that I still get scared when I meet new people?" I knelt beside him. "It's more than okay to trust your feelings, Jaime. That's what saved us. Your feeling about that man was your superpower." "The superpower of paying attention," he said thoughtfully. I smiled. Exactly like that. Our ordeal had changed us. Kathleen started a support group for victims of romantic fraud, turning her pain into a shield for others. Jaime, once quiet, now excelled at chess, his superpower, making him a formidable strategist. And I learned that the fiercest battles aren't fought in courtrooms, but in the quiet spaces of a family home. We would carry the scars, but we were not broken. We were remade stronger. We teach our children to be polite, to rationalize away the strange, prickling feeling in their gut. But Jaime taught us the truth: the most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile, and the greatest weapon we have is the very instinct we're told to ignore. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of trusting your gut, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth, and let us know in the comments about a time your own intuition saved you.